Well, I gotta say, Jim, this is so much of what I love about LifeLight and why I wanted to bring LifeLight to redemption was just because these conversations open to wonderful conversations and additional conversations, and the conversations never stop, and it makes us better Christians, it makes us better followers of God, it makes us better neighbors and citizens and everything like that, being able to have discussions and even disagreements. I love it. I love it. Yeah, just to keep talking and to dive into the Word of God like this is phenomenal. Phenomenal. So I'm gonna give my welcome. So welcome to our last session of LifeLight. I'm kind of sad. I'm kind of really sad.
We're going to do another LifeLight.
Yeah, right. Of our judges session. Thank you. Yeah, there's no way I'm letting this die, especially with all of your enthusiasm and excitement. I know Keith and Judy are in Hawaii right now, and Michael and Teresa, I haven't heard from them. I think they had a really long weekend that he was in Chicago, and Michael had to go and play in Chicago. So we may not see them today. We may see them. They may join us. But nonetheless, what a joy it's been to walk through Judges with you. And I have to be honest with you. There's a lot of Judges that I haven't read before. A lot of Judges that I was introduced to throughout this process, and I thank you for that. I thank you for all of this wonderful discussion that we've had. Now, we talked about having one more session before the summer. And I was looking at, first off, Romans is huge. So I know we talked about doing Romans next. That's 18 sessions long. So we'll start that in the fall, and we're not going to finish it until the spring.
That'll take the whole year.
Yeah. So we'll break that. It breaks itself up into 2 sessions, or two of these books, and so we'll order those books again. We'll do the first session in the fall, second session in the spring. Although I think what I might do for my sanity next year is we'll do half of the session before Lent, and the rest of it after Easter. So that it's not quite so crunched and and even possibly rushed. We want to give it the justice it deserves. So, but what I did find was that there is a study that is 4 sessions long. All of these studies are kind of are all 9 sessions long. The smaller books are stretched into 9 sessions, and the big books are smushed down into 9 sessions or expanded out to 18 sessions. But I found one exception to that rule. 1 John. 1 John. And so if everyone's on board for that, after Easter we can do a 4-session study on 1 John. So I'll have the information out again. Books are again that same $13 cost, yeah. But I'm kind of excited because 1 John's one of my favorite books, and it's where my confirmation verse came out. At 1 John 4:18, there's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out all fear.
I was going to say, 1 John's all about the love.
It is. John is all about the love. Whether you go to his gospel or any of his epistles, it's there. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of love in our chapter for today.
Sex and violence.
Yeah. I spent today working on it, so I've gotten into. I know that the devotional model works for a lot of people of doing it one day at a time. It doesn't work for me. I want to sit down and dive deep and dive in and keep going. And so I always make that part of my Monday routine.
That's what we have done too, at least this one.
Yeah.
I just sat down and
Yeah.
did it all. I mean,
Yeah.
a little bit the last page maybe.
So I knew this was probably going to be a really dark one when Deb stops into the office today and says, "Oh boy, this one, yeah." And she was right. She was right. This is one of the darkest chapters in Scripture that I've ever read, yeah, it made me really sad, and there were some moments I got so upset I had to just stand up and walk away. You get so stinking frustrated at God's people for not being God's people, right? Not acting like God's people. And this was one of those chapters. It just infuriated me and made me weep inside. But nonetheless, it is our last session to talk about. So, Judges 19 to 21. Let's begin, as always, with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, my sins are great, but your love is greater. As I sin, your grace abounds all the more. As I study this lesson with all of its shameful and gory details, help me to remember that you have atoned for all sins, both great and small, through the death of your Son. Help me to remember your love for me shall never end, even when I do what is right in my own eyes. Help me, O Lord, to live according to your will, for Jesus' sake. Amen.
Amen.
All right, Judges 19, 1 through 21. In those days when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite who was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah, and his concubine was unfaithful to him. And she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. When the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there. On the 4th day they arose early in the morning, and he prepared to go. The girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go." So the two of them sat and ate and drank together, and the girl's father said to the man, "Be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." And when the man rose up to go, his father-in-law pressed him till he spent the night there again. On the 5th day he arose early in the morning to depart. The girl's father said, "Strengthen your heart, and wait until the day declines." So they ate, both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Behold, now the day has waned toward evening. Please spend the night. Behold, the day draws to a close. Lodge here and let your heart be merry. And tomorrow you shall arise and go in the morning for your journey and go home." But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is, Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys and his concubine with him. And when they were near Jebus, the day was nearly over. And the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites, and spend the night in it." And his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners, who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah." And he said to his young man, "Come, and let us draw near to one of these places, and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah." So they passed on, and went on their way. And the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. And they turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. He went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah. The men of the place were Benjamites. He lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. The old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" He said to him, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to the house of Yahweh, but no one has taken me into his house. We have straw and feed for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and your female servant, and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything." The old man said, "Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square." So he brought him into his house and gave the donkeys feed, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. All right, so last week we learned how far the Israelites had fallen into idolatry, and this week we look at perhaps the most troubling chapters of the Holy Scripture. We shall learn in graphic detail how far Israel had tumbled into immorality and lawlessness. The details are unpleasant, but necessary. For from these very people, God sent forth his Son to save the entire world from its sin. This is a story designed to show us the incredible depth of God's love and grace for all people.
Before we go on with that,
Yes.
those lines where the father is asking him, "Oh, please come and stay with us.
Mhm.
Please come and stay with us." Isn't that the role of the mother? Come here, come here, come here.
Mm, Not necessarily. Not necessarily, and often within that culture, it would be the patriarch's
Okay,
responsibility
okay,
to
in
make that
culture,
invitation.
But I'm thinking today, okay, doesn't the mother say, "Oh, come, here's my daughter, here's my son."
Sure. I suppose American culture, especially when you look at our history in the decades past, that was definitely true. I'm not sure that that's true today. We've become less and less hospitable as we've moved along through the sands of time. But yeah.
Okay.
I did want to bring up that last week we talked a little bit about timelines, and Michael had brought up some information from his Bible, and I just wanted to confirm with everyone that what Michael brought forward is right. That all of these sections, all of these chapters here, take place within the Judges timeline, and it's hard to place them, and none of the scholars really do. And I realized I was kind of looking in the wrong place for the answer to this, because why this happens before Samson is shown in 1 Samuel. In the first chapters of 1 Samuel, it points out that Eli, Samuel's father confessor, so to speak, was a judge. It actually articulates that he was a judge. But he was also the one who oversaw God's house in Shiloh during the time of Samson. And so these events would have happened well before Eli, because as Eli's coming into office, we're moving into a time where kings become part of the conversation. And so that does place it fairly well within Scripture, or within that timeline, and pushes that back up before Samson. So, yeah. So we're talking pre-Samson. This is happening during the time of the Judges. Where during the time of the Judges, that I did not find. And it's relatively unimportant, because a lot of what Judges is pointing out is the sinful human condition, God's faithfulness in the midst of the unfaithfulness of God's people. Right? So this is a time where there is no king in Israel, and that is what the author keeps reminding us. A Levite, a man set apart for the service of the Lord, takes a concubine for his wife. In the Old Testament, we find numerous examples of men who had more than one wife. The term concubine was used to designate a spouse who was of an inferior social grade, or a slave, to indicate that she did not share in her husband's rank or property, nor in the administration of the house to the same extent as the principal wife. What did this concubine do?
became angry.
Yeah.
Went back to her father's house for about 4 months.
Yeah, and I think I like the way that you put that she became angry. That's something that the Latin and the Greek Bibles kind of draw out of this, but it's not really found too much in the Hebrew. In fact, the Hebrew kind of writes a different story. The Hebrew points to unfaithfulness on her behalf. So it almost sounds as though she was unfaithful in the sense of it could be sexual infidelity, it could be responsibility unfaithfulness, but nonetheless it points to a problem that was seen throughout all of the Old Testament, right? It listed several examples of the patriarchs who had more than one wife. And what do we learn from every single one of those circumstances?
There's usually trouble.
There's usually trouble. There's drama. It's not a good pattern for home. And so it's not surprising then when we get to the New Testament and they begin to point to the home as husband and wife, right? One wife. And the two become one flesh. And so going back to that model of that was started in the Garden of Eden, where it was Adam and Eve and Genevieve. Oh wait, no, it was Adam and Eve, right? There wasn't more than one because that's not a healthy model. And if you look at all the patriarchs who pursue a model of multiple wives, there's often trouble. There's often trouble and often problems with that. And so it's not surprising here to find a Levite who, it says concubine, it has no mention of a wife. So I don't know what kind of distress caused this, whether it was something that caused her unfaithfulness or spurned her anger toward her husband, but for whatever reason, she felt like she needed to return home. And if you watch the way that he treats her, I don't blame her. I don't blame her. And I say that very, very seriously because throughout this I saw a pattern of abuse. And as I was reading through this, I just kept imagining a woman who's caught in a relationship of abuse. I mean, for goodness sakes, she's not even on the same status as he is. And he makes that clear. He makes that point as he demands her around, right? This is how those modern feminists will often view marriage, right? This is what they're imagining when it comes to marriage. That the husband just bosses the wife around and she's inferior and she's got no status. Now, of course, that's not what marriage is ever meant to be. But I would want to run away from that too if I was stuck in that pattern. So she returns home to her father. The Levite goes to Bethlehem, so he chases after her. And what's her father's reaction to the Levite?
He creates some hospitality.
Yeah, he creates a lot of hospitality. Perhaps over the top hospitality. Why? Why do you think that the Levite, why do you think the father was so gracious to the Levite? What was his purpose in this?
Don't you think he was blaming his daughter? Yeah, it must be her fault.
Well, if she was unfaithful,
Right.
that's, the penalty is death for adultery.
Very true.
No
Okay.
matter.
And a few of the,
So if she runs back to her dad's,
she's
he's
maybe
gonna want
trying to,
butter up the Levite so he doesn't
so he
kill his
doesn't
daughter.
kill her. Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the directions that some of the commentators took. And so in that way they kind of portray him as the goody little angel. And when you get a little bit farther, when you get into that story of Gibeah, you realize that's not the story here. That's not what's going on here. But yeah, that could be part of the narrative, is that he's worried that unfaithfulness will lead to her execution, and he's trying to butter her up. Michael, did you have something to add?
He's just hoping that they can be reunited.
Yeah, well, and I think that's if you wanted to get away from the details and just take a bird's eye view and understand the notion here, it's all about reunification and making the relationship whole again, right? He's trying to get rid of any dishonor that his daughter may have caused for this man, right?
Well, truthfully, he probably, if she was a concubine and not a wife, he probably sold her to him.
That's true. That could be part of it too. I mean, we're given no history of the concubine, but there's a decent chance that he sold her to him, and then this poor woman runs to the one place that she hopes to find sanctuary, and there she's just she's blamed, right? So when the Levite and his concubine departed Bethlehem, what nearby city do they avoid?
Jerusalem?
Jebus.
Yeah. At this time it's Jebus, right? It will eventually become Jerusalem when the Israelites take it. But if you remember from earlier on in Judges, Jerusalem was never fully conquered. They let the Jebusites stay and live. And because of that, the Jebusites ended up taking Jerusalem back. And so at this point in history, it's owned by the Jebusites. It's not Jerusalem, it's Jebus. And when when Saul? I think Saul is the one who conquers Jerusalem and takes it back for Israel. But it's not until then that it becomes Jerusalem. But that is the city that we're talking about. That is the city that we're talking about. So why did the Levite not want to spend the night in that city?
They weren't people of Israel.
They weren't people of Israel. And why is that cause for concern? Here's where the irony comes in.
Right.
He was worried about hospitality there.
He was worried about hospitality
And safety.
because foreigners tend to be immoral people. Right? That's at least the attitude of the Israelites. Right? Is that the Israelites have this covenant, this morality that they cling to, and thus it's a safe group to be with. But the foreigners, they're the evil ones, they're the immoral ones, they're the ones who aren't going to give us any hospitality. And yet, what happens when they arrive in the city square in Gibeah, which is a town in the tribe of Benjamin?
No one takes them in.
No hospitality. Not a single person takes them in. And we mentioned this, we talked about this when we were setting up the nativity. That inns were not really a thing in this culture because they weren't necessary within this culture. Now you may have some in Jerusalem or something like that, not at this time, but it wasn't necessary because you have this kind of unwritten rule of hospitality that when the sojourner comes, you take them into your home and you treat them with love and respect and you care for all of their needs. That doesn't happen here. That doesn't happen here. But who finally offers him a place to stay?
An old man coming home from work.
Yeah. And what do we know about this old man?
It's from the hill country of Ephraim.
Okay, he's from the same place where this Levite is from, where they're sojourning from, right? So, in that they share commonality, but he's not from Gibeah. He's not from the tribe of Benjamin, right? Even he's a sojourner. So it takes a sojourner from the same land to take him in, right? And what a blessing that this gentleman has built a life for himself now here in Gibeah and has that ability to take the Levite in. And where did the Levite say that he was traveling to?
It said they're on their way to a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim.
Okay, in Ephraim, yeah.
In Ephraim, where he lived.
Mm-hmm.
The house of the Lord.
Yeah, he indicates that he's going to the house of the Lord, to Shiloh. Whether or not he actually intended to go there, right? And you're not wrong, Judy, he does mention that, right? I just want to clarify, he does say that he's from there and he's going back there, but he does indicate that he intends on this detour to Shiloh to worship the Lord in his house. And whether or not he intends to go there, it indicates him as a pious Jew, as someone who follows after Yahweh, right? So why do you think the old man welcomed him into his home? Why do you think? He says it, right? He indicates it, right?
He didn't want him to spend the night in the square.
Okay, yeah.
Did he know that there were wicked men out there and what they were allowed to do?
More than likely.
Yeah.
I'm sure he knew his neighbors and he knew his community. I'm not sure that he knew exactly what they were going to do, but he knew that staying out in the square was trouble, right? Yeah, I mean...
And the Levites said they wouldn't be any trouble. They have food for their animals, they have food for themselves.
Yeah.
They just need a place to stay.
We just need this park bench to stay. Please don't throw us in jail overnight. Like, we won't cause any trouble. We'll be gone by morning, kind of a thing. It's the sojourner's line. It's the hobo's line, right? We're just passing through. We're just passing through. And yet, he has this notion to protect him. He knows what kind of neighborhood and community they're looking at, and that it's not safe.
Weren't they both from Ephraim?
Right, right.
Yeah.
They're from the same area, and so thus they have that commonality together. As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows. There's that term again. Surrounded the house, beating on the door, and they said to the old man, the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them and do whatever seems good to you, but against this man do not do this outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house, where her master was, until it was light. And her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house, with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let us be going." But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his house. And when he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, "Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak." Then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead. And the congregation assembled as one man to Yahweh at Mizpah. And the chiefs of the people of the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the people of Israel said, "Tell us how did this evil happen?" And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered them and said, "I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces, and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they had committed abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, the people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. And all the people arose as one man, saying, none of us will go to his tent, none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000, to bring provisions for the people, that when they come, they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the outrage they have committed in Israel. So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one man. Wow. It's like an episode of Criminal Minds. The psychopathic behaviors of God's people continue from what we've seen throughout Judges. While spending the night with the old man, what happens?
Sodom and Gomorrah event here.
Well, now you're jumping ahead.
Sorry.
That's the next question.
Some men came and broke down the door to try and get them.
Well, they didn't break down the door. They're knocking at the door,
Oh, they
right?
knocked
They're
at the door.
threatening. They're threatening to break down the door.
Yeah, send out your visitor.
And what is their request?
They wanted 6.
They wanted-
Yeah, specifically they ask it from
The
the
Levite.
Levite,
Mhm.
right? The Levite. This is Gibeah of Benjamin. It's not the pagan city that was supposed to be hostile and evil and not provide hospitality. This is God's people. This is a place where this Levite expected sanctuary and safety, and yet what does this episode remind you of?
Sodom.
Sodom and Gomorrah, right?
Mhm.
Sodom and Gomorrah. But Sodom and Gomorrah ended a lot better for Lot and the angel visitor, right, than it does for this Levite and his concubine. How does the old man try to appease the carnal appetite of the crowd?
Gave him his virgin daughter.
Yeah.
Offers
Yeah.
to give him his virgin daughter and
Concubine.
the concubine. What does it say about the morals of the old man?
Save myself first.
Okay,
Yeah.
save myself, save my guest.
Let the situation determine his actions.
Yes, right? He doesn't have enough moral
Doesn't
fiber
have
to
any moral
impose on the
fiber, yeah.
situation. He's willing to compromise
Went along with
to
what was
appease.
happening.
Yeah, and it is a compromise. And I had, when I worked at a Pan-Lutheran camp in Idaho for a summer. And there was a young lady who was just zealous for the Lord and different things like that. And for some reason, she wanted to talk about deep topics with me. And one of the topics that she kept bringing up was homosexuality, and I didn't want to talk to her about it. I was like, I'm a college kid, for goodness sakes. I don't know. But in one of our discussions, she kept bringing up Sodom and Gomorrah and pointing out, isn't the real sin of this rape? Isn't the real sin of this rape and not homosexuality? And I said, look at Lot, the way that Lot handles it. Lot is a righteous man of God. And I'm not saying that what he does is right, but he tries to compromise with the people threatening to kill them. Right? And again, I'm not saying that Lot did what was right, but his compromise is rape. His compromise is rape my virgin daughters rather than committing this homosexual act against my guest. Right? Even here, the old man is trying to make a compromise. Do the lesser evil. Have my daughter and this man's concubine. But what does that say about the old man? Again, that he has no moral fiber. Right? the lesser of two evils is still evil. Right? It's one thing to say, do I want to go to the grocery store or do I want to clean my dog? Okay, those are two chores and they have to be done. This is an actual moral quandary. The answer is neither. The answer is neither is okay. And to be willing to compromise one, to compromise the innocence of your daughter, makes you want to weep.
Well, it makes you wonder, if this was going on, and he knew it was going on, why didn't he protect his daughter somehow? Why didn't he?
Right. Well, and he kind of does. He kind of does, because the Levite, notice the daughter is never put in any danger.
Yeah, she shouldn't have been living there in such a bad place. She should have been hid, or she should have had some kind of safety sometime. He didn't care.
Sure. But the bigger thing is that the Levite forces his concubine out, and the daughter's never put in any harm. The daughter's left in the house.
Yeah.
She's a slave.
She's of lesser value. She's property. It's sick.
It is.
It is sick.
It's not a healthy thing at all.
No, it is sick the way that this is handled. And you can go over all of the dilemmas in your mind of, they didn't have a choice. Those people were going to kill them all if they didn't do something, right? What have you? No, there's always a choice. And there's always a way to do what is right rather than compromise on what is good. There's always a choice. Don't lie to yourself to get yourself out of those moral quandaries. There's always a choice, right? And sometimes that choice hurts a lot. But there's always a choice. And I had this actually come up once. We were doing an ethics class at the seminary, and one of the things that had come up was the old Nazi example. Have you guys seen what movie is that? It was a really, really, really dark film. And essentially some Nazis come up to this Polish area, and one of the members of that congregation had somehow sabotaged Nazi equipment in the area. And they knew that she was from that area, knew that she attended that parish. So they come in and interrupt a service. And I don't remember what service it was, but they come in guns a-blazing and different things like that. And they do their whole spiel of, whoever it was, give yourself up, and no one else has to get hurt. And well, they don't give themselves up. And so then they come up to the priest, and the priest is then confronted by the Nazi leader, and the Nazi leader is like, you know all their sins, you've heard their confessions, you know who these people are, and you know the evil that they've done. And then he even quotes scripture, right? Is it not better that one should die than all should perish? Right? Referencing the way in which the chief priest justifies Jesus' death. Is it not better that one man die than the multitudes perish? But nonetheless, this priest is confronted with this terrible, terrible decision of, do I give this person up? It's never really shown whether or not he actually knew who did it, at least that I'd seen. And so this moral quandary was put before our class. What if a gunman comes into your church and whatnot? And you had all of these people going, I'd be carrying, so I'd just step out of the pulpit and fire. And you had some discussions of like, we'd have a good security system so that wouldn't happen. And it's just like, okay, well, they bypass your security. Don't try to get around this question. And finally, I stood up and I said, I'd be the first one to take a bullet. I'd start walking down the aisle, and I would try to talk this person down and try to get to the bottom of why this happened and what on earth is going on here. But like, even in the most compromising situations, there are ways to do what is good and what is right. And they don't do it here. I mean, this just shows the depravity that even the Levite would put, concubine or not, would put his beloved flesh of mine in harm's way like that. Oh my gosh. I can't believe that. I cannot believe the depravity of the Levite, the depravity of this old man, the depravity of the whole tribe of Benjamin here. And how awful this whole situation plays out. So what does the crowd do? You hate to even vocalize it. Rapes the concubine all night long, and she's dead by morning. What happens to the concubine? She dies. So the Levite comes out and says, we got to get out of here. Right? You can look at that and be like, oh, how heartless that he says, get up, let's go. But one, you don't understand his tone. It could have been a very loving tone. But also, I would want to get the heck out of there too. Right? There's a sense of urgency to what he says. Now, I don't think that he actually loves and respects this woman as much as he should. And I don't think that he treats her very well at all. And that's an awful piece of this whole thing too. As he's confronted with this awful situation. But what unbelievable act. I mean, it just moves from one thing to the next. Like, I'm not sure. This is an awful thing that he does. Right? He takes her home, packs her up on the donkey, and what does he do when he gets her home?
Cuts her.
Cuts her into 12 pieces.
Right, he cuts her into 12 pieces. And I mean, I think...
Send her, I need coffee.
Yeah. And how does the author of Judges summarize that statement? Or summarize that?
Such a thing has never happened before.
Yeah. Or been seen since.
Yeah.
Deb, do you want
Have a
coffee?
good thing. No, I'm still
No,
working on
anybody
it.
else want coffee?
Etc. Take advice, speak your minds,
What's that?
what the author's talking about.
Yeah. And so let's gather up, consider what's happened, take counsel, and do something about it.
Yeah.
Right? There's this urgent call to respond to this act of evil. Hearing the atrocity, all of Israel from the north to the south gather at Mizpah with 400,000 armed soldiers. You know that they're ready to stand against something, right? What do they intend to do?
They go to war.
Yeah, against who?
Basically a brother, Benjamin.
Right?
Yeah.
Their brother Benjamin, specifically, they're going for the town of Gibeah, who has done this awful thing. And notice that their initial request is for the Benjamites to give over, specifically the ones who did what was wrong. And so all of this could have been avoided if Benjamin had gone to that city, found the people who did this, and brought them to receive justice for their punishment. Brought them to feel God's wrath for what they had done. Why was it necessary for Israel to put these men to death?
That's what the law indicated. That's
Yeah.
what the law is called for,
Right, right,
is
and
to purge the evil.
to purge the evil, yeah, to purge the evil, God's death penalty, so to speak. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. The tribes of Israel sent men throughout all the tribe of Benjamin. What evil is this that has taken place among you? Now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel. But the Benjamites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. Then the people of Benjamin came together out of the cities to Gibeah to go out to battle against the people of Israel. The people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 chosen men. Among all these 700 chosen men, who were left-handed, every one could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. The men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All of these were men of war. The people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first to fight against the people of Benjamin? And Yahweh said, Judah shall go up first. Then the people of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah, and the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin, and the men of Israel drew up the battle line against them at Gibeah. The people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the people, the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. The people of Israel went up and wept before Yahweh until the evening, and they inquired of the Lord, shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? And then Yahweh said, go up against them. So the people of Israel came near against the people of Benjamin the second day, and Benjamin went against them out of Gibeah the second day, and destroyed 18,000 men of the people of Israel. All these were men who drew the sword. Then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before Yahweh and fasted that day until evening, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before Yahweh. The people of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before them in those days, saying, shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And Yahweh said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. So Israel sent men in ambush around Gibeah. The people of Israel went up against the people of Benjamin on the third day, and set themselves in array against Gibeah, as at other times. And the people of Benjamin went out against the people, and were drawn away from the city. And as at other times, they began to strike and kill some of the people in the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel, the other to Gibeah, and in the open country, about 30 men of Israel. The people of Benjamin said, they are routed before us as at the first. But the people of Israel said, let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highways. And all the men of Israel rose up out of their place, and set themselves in array at Baal Tamar. And the men of Israel who were in ambush rushed out of their place from Meribah, and there they came against Gibeah, 10,000 chosen men out of all of Israel. And the battle was hard, but the Benjamites did not know that disaster was close upon them. Yahweh defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All these were men who drew the sword. All right, so the men of Israel sought revenge for the brutal rape and murder of the Levite's concubine. When they asked the men of Gibeah to turn over the culprits, what was their response?
Came out to do battle with them.
Yeah, they prepared for a fight. And it speaks to the integrity of Benjamin, that they would distrust the rest of Israel and not want to seek justice on behalf of the Levite either. Right? So they come out preparing for war. How many men do the Benjamites muster?
25,400.
No,
26,700.
yes, the 25,100 were how many were routed at the end.
Why this distinction here
Mm.
about the 700 that were left-handed?
That is a good question.
Because nobody expects that,
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? They don't expect that, and it's more impressive that they could throw a stone at a hare and hit it.
right.
Yeah.
Like, that's impressive.
Yeah, remember which
The
which
Benjamin
judge?
Ehud.
Yeah, Ehud was the one who attained victory because they were surprised that he was left-handed.
Yeah, they drew the
Right.
sword that way.
Right. In the same way, this probably would have had a surprise factor on the Israelites. And I agree with you. I think the more important part is how skilled they were with a sling, right? How skilled they were. And yeah. So I think a lot of that is just to try to point out their prowess in battle,
Okay.
right? And that they do have a few things on their side. How many soldiers would they face?
400,000?
400,000. Yeah,
That's a lot of people.
it is.
Gosh.
Well, and I was, something drew my attention when I was reading it this last time. I don't know. I don't know. I have some questions. I'll be speaking with Samuel in heaven.
So the population of Bloomington is what?
90,000?
Not quite, yeah, we're around 90.
90,000. Gosh.
Yeah, we're talking serious numbers.
We're the size of Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, so, well, and you're talking about basically a country, right, or a state. I guess that's probably better, you can think about these as the 12 states of Israel, right, right, and so they're going up against Massachusetts or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was one of the smaller ones, but it was still, we're not talking about a city, we're talking about a huge tribe, right, a tribe of people. So then when the Israelites went up to Bethel, what did they ask of the Lord?
Who should go first?
Who should go first? And the Lord's response?
Judah.
Judah.
Judah. So on that first day of battle, how well do the men of Benjamin fare against the combined forces of Israel?
He killed 22,000 of them.
Right. Right. This whole battle baffles me. I mean, it really baffles me because God is bringing down His hammer of justice on evildoers here, right? And He comes into this fight, and yet at the same point, the Benjamites find some success, which is kind of frustrating to me. But this almost feels like the battle of what is it, with the 300 Spartans against the whole Persian army, and they last like 2 days, and then the Persians finally come behind and ambush them, and because they're surrounded, they lose their vantage point, and they finally fail.
The movie 300.
Yeah. The only way that I can logically figure this out, why this falls this way, and I may be wrong, so please do not take this as gospel truth, okay? But the way that I read and understood this was that there is some vantage point that that the Benjamites have. There's some vantage point that allows them success, and because they have such skilled slinging, sling users and whatnot. The Israelites aren't even able to lay a finger on them, kind of a thing. I'm sure they had probably some losses, but no losses are indicated here, which means that they weren't significant losses, right? So there's some level of vantage point that allows these Benjamite success. Let's see, so then on the first day of battle, they slayed 22,000 people, nearly one soldier apiece. That's a crazy KDA. Having suffered, little MMO talk there, having suffered such a great loss against numerically inferior force, what did Israel do?
Sends in the backup.
Asking for God's guidance.
Right, they weep and they seek after God's guidance. Like, is this really what you want for us? Do you really want us to go against them? And how does God respond?
Yep.
Go get him.
Go get them. Go get them. And how does Benjamin fare in the second day?
Not good.
He didn't.
Benjamin fares well. Israel doesn't fare too well. Right? How many do Benjamin slay? Yeah, Benjamin slays 18,000. 18,000. So then how does Israel respond to that defeat?
They talk to God again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you sure? Are you really sure?
Yeah, well, and they even show greater signs of faith, right? They fast, they give burnt offerings, they weep again, and then they ask of the Lord once more. How does God respond this time?
One more time, I'm giving them to you.
I got you this time, where you're going to win. Go tomorrow and I will give them to you. And on that last day, what happens?
They ambush the Benjamites.
They ambush the Benjamites.
He used to choke.
10,000
Yeah,
Israelites.
yeah. I mean, they really did. They really did. The next section will give us more details on that fight. But yeah, they do. They come in with a decent military strategy, and they succeed. And I don't want to attribute the strategy for the victory, right? The victory is ultimately God's, but it does say something that, like, when God calls you to do something, approach it with a level of intelligence. Like, that's okay. That's not wrong. And I'm not saying that they weren't intelligent here. I mean, they were men of war, so they knew what they were doing, but...
Well, the first 2 days probably set them up.
Probably.
Because they're like, oh, okay, here we go again, let's go get these guys, and then...
And now Benjamin has, the tribe of Benjamin has so much pride and so much, they feel like they can do it, so then they draw them out of the city, right? And it's not clear in the first 2 days that Benjamin were ever drawn out of the city. And again, that's a lot of what I pointed to is, notice the emphasis that they put on the slings. Likely what we're talking about here is that the Israelites weren't even able to get to them because they had really good sling throwers and different things like that. And so let's read this next section and then let's talk about the military strategy that they bring out. All right. So then the people of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. The men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin. So I guess I should just point out, remember that the way that Hebrews write, as frustrating as this can be sometimes, is that they kind of give you the bird's eye view of the narrative and then they zoom in, right? And then they give you the details. So this isn't a second scenario, this isn't a second story, this is more details of what happened during that fight. The men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin because they trusted the men in ambush whom they had set against Gibeah. Then the men in ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah. The men in ambush moved out and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the men in the main ambush was that when they made a great cloud of smoke rise up out of the city, the men of Israel should turn in battle. Now Benjamin had begun to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. They said, surely they are defeated before us, as in the first battle. But when the signal began to rise out of the city in the column of smoke, the Benjamites looked behind them, and behold, the whole of the city went up in smoke to heaven. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were dismayed, for they saw that the disaster was close upon them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness. But the battle overtook them. And those who came out of the cities were destroying them in their midst. Surrounding the Benjamites, they pursued them and trod them down from Noah as far as the opposite of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all of them men of valor. And they turned and fled into the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. 5,000 men of them were cut down in the highways, and they were pursued hard to get them. And 2,000 of them were struck down. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men who drew the sword, all of them men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled into the wilderness to the rocks of Rimmon, and remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. The men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, men and beasts, and all that they found, and all the towns that they found they set on fire. Now the men of Israel, seems like a really weird part to get into before we talk about it, but okay. Now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. And the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, O Yahweh, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? All right, so here we learn some details of that final battle with the men of Benjamin. What was the signal for Israel to turn back? Why do we start there? First of all, what was the military strategy?
Go in and fight them,
Yep,
do all right, and then run out again.
yeah. And as they chase you, they'll leave Gibeah. And then what?
And again, burn the city.
That the men that
No
are
kidding.
in the hills go down
Exactly.
into the highways and kill
And
them.
they go and destroy the city. They
Right.
kill everyone and burn the whole city to the ground. Right? And so then what was the signal for Israel to stop their retreat, stop their fake retreat, and turn around?
Great flame.
Great fire.
Yeah, that the city was burning.
Mhm.
The people would, and then when the Benjamites saw that the city was burning, how did they react?
They turned to go back in the city.
No.
They thought that evil was
They-
coming.
They were.
Ran.
Yes. They saw the evil was coming, so what did they do?
They ran to the desert.
They panicked and ran. They ran to the wilderness. They ran as far away as they could because they knew that there was a force behind them as well. Right? It was only a force of 10,000, but they didn't know that. All they saw was that their city was burning. So they panic and they knew that their end was near, and so they run. What did the Israelites... Well, so then what did the Israelites do before they defeat the army? They chase them down, right? They chase them down and kill every one of them that they can get their hands on.
25,000?
Yep, that's the number that we're given. And so you can kind of piece together how many would have died day 1 and day 2. Well, not really. Not really. It still seems to indicate that no one died day 1 and day 2 on the side of the Benjamites. Because
Unless
you have them
25,000
fleeing.
is a total.
Right, well,
You know.
let's see. Let's look at this. Let's look at this.
There are 600 remaining.
Right.
Israelites killed 25,000 of the
So
Benjamites.
So 25,000 men. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men who drew the sword, but 600 men to turn and fled. So you can do that math. So we have from the beginning 26,7. So 1,100 men were what was lost in day 1 and day 2 on behalf of the Benjamites. Supposing that those numbers are as accurate as we're going to get. Right? Let's just be honest. Those are round numbers, but that's all we've got. So we're looking at about 1,100 men that were lost day 1 and day 2. 25,000 men are lost on this day. and 600 escaped, which answers our next question. Well, no, we have to do 17 yet. What do the Israelites do after defeating the army of Benjamin?
They launched something that we didn't have the idea of until World War II. They launched total warfare.
They set their towns on fire.
Fire.
Right, they set their towns on fire, they're killed,
Well,
and
that's
we're
what
we're
I'm
given
saying.
indication that men, women, children,
Sure.
everyone died.
Cattle.
Which is I will say, this is a rarity in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
This is a rarity in the Old Testament. Yeah. How many of the soldiers of Benjamin escape?
600?
And why is that significant? Why do you think that's significant?
Why?
That was,
Are we going by the numbers used in the Bible?
No, it's not numerology.
No,
Okay.
it's just that, so the tribe wouldn't be wiped out.
Right, the tribe of Benjamin is
There had to
not
be a remnant.
exterminated, there's a remnant, right, there's a remnant there.
mhm.
And it's so, I'm gonna go here, but we shouldn't go here,
Okay,
okay? We can't know the mind of God. We can't know what He's thinking. But you have to wonder if God's whole plan was just to wipe out that tribe. Right? I mean, obviously it doesn't. But are the people of God right in trying to nurture that tribe of Benjamin back to reality? Or are they somehow undermining God's divine justice in that way? Right?
You could also say that God allowed 600 men to survive.
Right, right. And that's why we can't come to a firm place here, because we don't know the mind of God. We don't know what He's doing here. But what we can say is that God's in control, and thus the way this turns out is His plan. Right? It is really hard when you think about the map of history and what are you doing, God? And I ask that question so often. What are you doing here? But to know, it's so hard to know. And when He's silent, we must be silent. Right? But nonetheless, I ponder sometimes. And thank you for pondering with me.
Let's say, I mentioned before, weren't they brothers at one time?
All of these tribes
Yeah,
were
all
brothers.
Yeah,
Right,
so
right.
that's what I find
Yeah.
kind of,
But we're generations down the line.
oh, right,
Right,
okay.
right.
Right? So those brotherly ties are gone. There's some level of obviously camaraderie and family and different things like that. You can see that in the Levite, who would rather stay with among his kin than in the city of foreigners. I bet in some ways he was probably wishing that he went to Ramah or even Jebus
Well,
than that night.
and the tribes that assembled against Benjamin, like, who's gonna go first? Like, you know, they honored the word there, and
Right.
God sends Judah just like He did at the beginning of
Exactly.
Judges.
Exactly.
Same thing, like, Judah will lead the way.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there is this still familial nature, but we are down the line. So some of that brotherly trust is probably not there. Yeah. Just like in any family, just on a grander scale.
Well, I mean, you get in, still family with, well, how are we gonna help Benjamin? All right, well, who didn't show up? We're gonna make them responsible for this. Like,
Yeah, it really is. While at Mizpah, they decided what action to take against the men of Gibeah for the rape of the murder. So again, now we're talking about that 600 people, that 600 men who succeeded in fleeing and are still alive. What is their punishment?
Not to allow them to marry the daughter of theirs.
Yeah, no daughters to marry the Benjamites. And then they go and they curse.
Right, right.
Second commandment here, guys. What's second commandment? Yeah, do not take the
Do not
name of
take the
the,
name of the Lord in vain,
right.
is what we learned. Now you've got a different translation.
No, well, I don't know about that, but that's exactly what we're talking about here. And Luther points out, you shall not swear or curse or oath by his name.
Yeah.
And here we are cursing by his name.
Mhm.
So they curse anyone who does give the daughters to the Benjamites. And then what did they do? After the battle was over, the cities of Benjamin burned. Why do the people weep?
Because they feel bad because the tribe of Benjamin is gonna die out now.
Right, because there is remorse here. There is remorse here, and they do feel a kinship with them. Do feel a kinship with them, even though they were upholding God's justice, God's
And the
law.
penalty for that was death.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But there's still sadness in that. There's still sadness in that, for sure. And now let's finish Judges. The next day the people rose early and built there an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. The people of Israel said, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up to the assembly to Yahweh? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who did not come up to Yahweh to Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. And the people of Israel had compassion for Benjamin their brother and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who are left? Since we have sworn by Yahweh that we will not give them any of our daughters for wives. They said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come to Yahweh to Mizpah? Behold, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were mustered, behold, no one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead were there. So the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there and commanded them, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, also the women and the little ones. And this is what you shall do. Every male and every woman that has lain with a male you shall devote to destruction. They found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Then the whole congregation sent word to the people of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time. They gave them the women whom they had saved alive from the women of Jabesh Gilead, but they were not enough for them. And the people had compassion on Benjamin because Yahweh had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? And they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe would be blotted out of Israel, that a tribe not be blotted out of Israel. Yet we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the people of Israel had sworn, cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, behold, there is the yearly feast of Yahweh at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel on the east of the highway. That goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebanon. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in ambush to the vineyards and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we shall say to them, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. The people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number from the dancers whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, rebuilt their towns, and lived in them. The people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family, and they went out from there every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
So they find a legal loophole.
After grieving for their brothers, the Benjamites, the Israelites offer sacrifices to God. They notice that the people from one area were not there. Who were they?
Jabesh Gilead.
Jabesh Gilead. They were from the tribe of Gad. So they were from the northeast.
And what relationship do they have to the others?
They're from the tribe of Gad in the northeast.
So there's no
It's another
relationship
Israel
with
tribe.
the others.
But they didn't show up.
They didn't show up.
Make the swear, I swear I'm not gonna give my daughter in.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. So they didn't show up. And the people of God saw that as a break with God's faithfulness.
Traitors.
Yeah, and it really becomes that loophole for them. Since all the Benjamite women and children had been killed, and all the tribes of Israel gathered at Mizpah and had sworn a solemn oath not to give their daughters in marriage to any Benjamite, the future of this tribe looked bleak. What did the Israelites do that, in a sense, killed two stones with one bird?
Other way around.
Kill the men and the pregnant women?
Well, no, it wasn't specific. I'm sure that. Why'd you have to bring that up, Warren? I'm sure there probably was some pregnant women involved. But no, it doesn't specifically target them. It targets the women and the children separately. But yes, you're probably right. Gosh, I hate this. But this is the result of the awfulness of human beings. It's the awfulness of human beings. Notice that this genocide is not done by God.
No, they didn't inquire about God.
They didn't
Which
inquire
was-
anything here.
Yeah, how are we gonna save this tribe?
Yeah, they see this as an opportunity to cover, to what they think is cover their butts.
Well, they're cleaning up a mess that they thought
Right, because
existed.
they made a stupid oath.
Right, because they made a stupid oath. No one told them to make that oath. Right, that wasn't of God. Right?
Well, and they passed judgment on their brothers for not showing up.
Exactly.
By saying, okay, well now we're gonna kill you,
Yeah.
and if you have a wife, we're gonna kill them too, we're just
Yeah.
gonna take your virgin children and.
So
and
starting
repopulate.
this Sunday, anybody who does not show up for worship, we will come to their homes and kill them.
This is unfair.
I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. But you see how ridiculous that sounds. You hear, please, for all those on internet, I love you all. There's no animosity between this congregation and you in any way, shape, or form. But I want to point out how ridiculous this is. Right? And you could even tie that to how many Christians pass judgment on each other for something as simple as that. Right? And you make the relationship even more broken. Right? But yeah, don't judge. It's not your job. So they go down and they kill all the residents of Jabesh Gilead, and except for the virgins. And what do they do? To offer peace to the Benjamites, who are still in hiding, by the way.
They bring them 400 virgins.
They bring them those virgins that they caught and say, here, there you go. Go and be a tribe once again. But there were not enough virgins, and so the group of Benjamin complain. Okay? So what do they do to get around their curse that they place upon themselves?
Go to the vineyards of Shiloh and seize a wife for the daughters of Shiloh.
Right. So imagine, right, the Passover, right? I'm not. Is it specific what feast?
I was wondering if it was like the harvest feast.
That could be. That could be.
It's an annual festival.
Because they would have celebrated that feast. The Feast of Booths is what it's called. They would have celebrated that feast as well. But whatever it is, for one of the feasts, there was big gatherings in Shiloh. And so all of the people of Israel, many of them come to gather in Shiloh to worship God. And in the midst of that dancing, some of the ladies,
Get snatched.
they get kidnapped.
Kind of like.
They get kidnapped. So, hold on. These people who they just tried to, who they just fought this huge battle with, and so many people lost their lives, right? Now they're like, okay, so here's what we want you guys to do to fix this. We want each of you to go and hide in the vineyards. And then, as creepily as you can, when you see a pretty lady, snatch her. And she's your wife now. And that'll fix it. Why do they think that this will fix that? Let's talk about it. How is this a loophole, so to speak?
Because the father isn't giving his daughter in marriage.
Right. So therefore he can't be cursed. And we're not giving your daughter either because the people of Benjamin are the ones kidnapping their wives.
And if they complain to us, we'll tell them, you know, we've already been hard enough on them, it'll be okay.
Yeah. Suck it up. It's fine.
So folks,
Have
will
another kid.
lock up your
Yeah.
daughters.
Have another kid. Oh, I'm just imagining if I had a daughter and I allowed any of this to happen.
No.
Oh my gosh. And here we get down to it. So after all of this, after all of the terrible things that Israel has done, after seeing God's faithfulness through all the midst of this, what is the chief thesis statement that the author of Judges characterizes this period of history with?
There was no king.
The way they
So there
started.
was,
And everyone did as he saw fit.
Yeah.
Hold on. There's something very specific that they say.
Everyone did what was right. in his
everyone
own
did
eyes.
what
Yes.
was right.
That's the statement that we hold on to. He says it. He says it so many times in this book. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Right. And before we get to the gospel piece of that, let's talk about that for a second. What does that actually mean? Everybody did what was right in his own eyes.
They used their own moral compass, which is broken.
Right. They lived by their own moral compass. They felt like they had to find their own way in life, and they had to, right? It's moral relativity. That's what it is. That's really what it is. It's moral relativity, where you have to discern what is good and what is right, and who you are in the midst of all of this. It really is moral relativity. They did what was right in their own eyes. Why? Because they didn't have a governing authority over the top of them to tell them what is right and wrong. How fickle we are as people. That when we don't have somebody overseeing us, we fall into that trap. And that's one of the ways that I think freedom, the American concept of freedom, is the greatest lie that we tell ourselves. Is that we see it as this great golden standard that we should chase after, and all we want is to be free. We don't want people telling us what to do. Well, everything has already been stated. Paul states this flawlessly. We are all slaves. Right? The question is, which master will you serve? Are you going to slave yourself to what is good, what is right, what is beautiful, what you were designed to do? Or are you going to enslave yourself to the flesh, to the moral quandaries of our world, to Satan, to sin? What will you tie yourself to? Because the concept that freedom exists is a misnomer. It's a complete misunderstanding of our life. It's not freedom, because we are bound to one another. We need to be bound to some level of a moral compass. And when we all do what is right in our own eyes, look at the way that humanity treats itself. Right? Look at Nazi Germany. or any dictator in history. Nazi Germany is just the low-hanging fruit, right? In many small ways, look at our culture today. Moral relativism is the standard now. Right?
But even if you're saying that freedom is there, it's that freedom under God that you have that freedom. Because of the relationship with God, you have that freedom, and that freedom allows you to do His will.
Yes, but in doing so, you're bound to His will.
But that's freedom.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
If it isn't, then what is?
Exactly.
Jesus' death and resurrection.
Jesus' death and resurrection frees us from slavery to sin so that we can be slaves to God. That's the language that Scripture uses.
Yeah.
I had a professor at the seminary that was always, there is no free will. There isn't. Because you're either bound to God or you're bound to evil. Even Luther, in his thesis, Freedom of a Christian, he goes into all of this, the way in which you are freed by Christ, freed from sin, freed from imprisonment to the devil, but free to become a slave to God.
That was exactly the essay I had in my mind.
The freedom of a Christian.
Freiheit des Christian mentioned.
Yeah.
Christian mentioned.
But even in that, Luther makes the thesis that freedom doesn't truly exist. The freedom that we have is freedom to serve under God. But even in that, we tie ourselves. But you see what I'm trying to do, though, Warren, right? I'm trying to break down this notion that we can live our lives without being tied to anything.
Yeah, of course.
Right? We have to commit ourselves to something.
Committed to something.
And in doing so, we do become enslaved to those ideals.
And that commitment is to God because He committed Himself to us first.
Exactly. I'm not saying that it's a bad enslavement. I'm saying that it's the greatest enslavement ever, right? But I am saying that it does limit our freedom. There is a point at which my ability to do whatever I choose goes out the window.
It stops, yeah.
Right? And in doing so, I can have so much more peace. I can have so much more comfort in that. Right? And so in that, there is just so much joy in being connected to God in that way.
But we're not puppets pulled by a string.
Right.
No.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And that's the freedom that Luther talks about.
Yeah.
Is the freedom to choose your master. Right. But what I'm trying to point out here is the quandary, the problems of moral relativism, and believing that we can cut ties with everything and that's okay. It's not. It's not. So then there were despicable and sinful people, and yet all throughout this, God never revokes His covenant. He even keeps the tribe of Benjamin alive. But throughout all of this, He maintains His covenant. What comfort does that bring us?
That covenant still means that God loves us.
Yes.
And it's out of love that He acts for us.
Exactly. Exactly. God's love and His covenant go far beyond our weaknesses and our sinful things. You will not ever do anything as wicked as the things that we've read about.
And the epitome of that love is Jesus on the cross.
Exactly. Exactly. And because of that covenant promise, and because of the way that He has treated us and the way that He has treated these terrible people.
He treated the whole world that way, except 95 or 98% of the world rejects it.
I don't know that it's that high, but
Well,
yeah.
it's pretty close.
Okay. But no matter what, God will not break his covenant with you. No matter your sinful weaknesses or your mistakes, God will never break his covenant with you. How does Paul state this in Romans 5?
His statement of everything on which his teaching is based. Where sin abounds, grace is even greater.
Right, right. Where sin abounds, grace is even greater. So as we've looked at probably the darkest part of Israel's history, and you made it through. But as we've looked at the darkest part of history, I hope that you can draw comfort and hope and peace, not from the moral character of Israel, but from God's faithfulness in the midst of an unfaithful age. May that be the rallying call of Judges for you every time that you think of these broken people who are dearly loved by God and everything going forward. May that always be the comfort for you. All right, be watching. I'm going to be sending out messages very soon about 1 John. Is everybody interested? I suppose I won't call you guys out. But is everybody in general interested in 1 John? Okay. Then I will send out information within the next couple weeks to get a head count, and then I'll make sure to order books. So thank you for being a part of the study and for all the great conversation.
Possibly starting after Easter?
Yeah, so we'll start a couple weeks after Easter and finish up before June.
Yeah.
Is kind of the hope. We'll probably do it largely during the month of May.
I keep going back to Israel and what's going on over there now. Is
Yeah.
it the same thing?
I mean, look at every nation ever. It's the same patterns.
Yeah.
It's the same patterns. Human beings continue to fall into sinful patterns and treat each other awfully, right? If we treated each other with the love and respect that God calls us to, there wouldn't be war, there wouldn't be violence, there wouldn't be hatred, right? We would treat each other with love and respect. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. And I mean, even when you look at the Christian church, look at the era of the Crusades, look at the awful way that Christians treated other people. It's not just the Jews, it's not just the other nations of the world, it's Christians too. It's Christians too. So yeah, you're right, Judy. You're right. What's happening in Israel is exactly what happens here in Judges. But that's also true for the fights in Russia and Ukraine, and in all the tribal wars in Africa. You know, it's just human nature in many ways.
Do you think there will be a time like there was here where God will say, go ahead and fight, I'm on your side, you'll win?
I mean, that may happen even today, but I can't say, right? Because I can't speak for God. But I will say that since the time of Jesus, God has been very quiet. God has been silent. So I'm not sure that he's going to speak into that. But it doesn't mean that you can't see God at work around us either, right? So I'm not going to say yay or nay to that, right? I will say that God is always at work in our lives,
Yeah.
even when we don't understand what's going on. But he remains faithful, even when we are unfaithful. So
I was thinking about this.
yeah.
What would I rather, get hit with a rock or get stabbed with a sword? There haven't been, during the Civil War, most of the men died of infections.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, you get hit with a rock, doesn't mean this, you're gonna die, but you can have a headache for a while.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Those who joined us online, thank you all for your great discussions. We'll do another study here, 1 John, probably around May, and then we're going to take the break for the summer. So thanks for being a part of it. We'll start back up in the fall again. Take care.